Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Talon Jones.
And I'm Alan Barty.
This episode we're going to talk about Michael Mann films, specifically Manhunter and The Keep. This is going to be the verdict. Spoilers ahead. Michael Mann is a director and screenwriter known for his crime dramas and the distinct stylized realism they presented. You might know him best for movies like Thief, Last of the Mohicans, and Heat, or Public Enemy. On this episode, we're going to talk about some of his lesser-known movies and one of his most acclaimed films that I love, Manhunter. Basically, Manhunter is actually the very first adaptation of the Hannibal Lecter series of books. It's actually an adaptation of the 1981 film Red Dragon, and this is predating Anthony Hopkins' appearance as Silence of the Lambs. So basically, I see this as a historical landmark of film. So let's take a look at the trailer.
Intruder entered through kitchen sliding door.
Nationwide victims.
Yeah, this is Will Graham of the FBI.
One killer.
This is what the subject's teeth look like.
Have you ever seen blood on the moonlight well?
William, you're gonna make yourself sick or get yourself killed.
Multiple trails.
Just you and me now, sport.
One hunter.
I'm gonna find you. Damn it.
FBI agent Will Graham. Manhunter.
So like I said earlier, this actually predated Anthony Hopkins' appearance as Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and another adaptation of the same source material, Red Dragon. Now, everyone knows about Red Dragon. That's actually seen as one of the more critically acclaimed of the Hannibal Lecter movies. And it is from the same source material, based on the same book, but that one's actually canon with the other film starring Anthony Hopkins. And it is more faithful to the book, and a lot of people see it as the better film. But people really do forget about this one. That's very unfair. It didn't do very well at the box office. It was when the Hannibal Lecter character wasn't a household name yet. And thus it has been forgotten by even fans of the Hannibal Lecter series. But I actually think this one is better than Red Dragon in many ways, including, personally, this is my favorite version of Hannibal Lecter as a character, even though he's been played by other actors other than Anthony Hopkins, like Mads Mikkelsen in the Hannibal TV series. This one, played by Brian Cox, he has more of a cold, calculating version rather than just staring at you creepily like Anthony Hopkins did. And don't get me wrong, I love Anthony Hopkins, but when you look at him, you see a monster. And in some ways, that's a good thing. But something that Michael Mann did with Manhunter, with his version of Hannibal Lecter, is very different. His is more cold and calculating, and he talks to you like he's not a serial killer. If you talk to him, you're not going to hear a cannibal, you're going to hear a therapist. And there's something really creepy about that. He can blend in a lot better than Anthony Hopkins can. When you talk to Anthony Hopkins' version of Hannibal, you know you're talking to someone demented. You know you're talking to someone who wants to kill you and eat you. If you're talking to Brian Cox's version of Hannibal Lecter, you just feel like you're talking to a doctor, and there's something very terrifying about that. What did you think of this movie?
I mean, I never read anything Hannibal Lecter before, so I was like, okay, like, what's this movie entail? Like, and it was very like, like, I did not expect it because, like, as you say, he was more calculated. Like, it wasn't a thing where it's like, oh yeah, I can just walk up to him, he's not gonna do anything suspicious, and next thing you know, wait, no, I'm dead. Well, I guess I write my will and testament.
It was the way he talked to you. Like, basically, he spoke very quickly. Like, Anthony Hopkins' version, or even Mads Mikkelsen, they would, like, be very slow and calculating, and more quiet. Whereas he'll talk so fast that before you know it, he's talking about something really messed up and getting under your skin. Like, the main character of the movie is Agent Graham, an FBI profiler who's trying to track down a serial killer called the Tooth Fairy. And he needs Hannibal Lecter's help, and because Hannibal Lecter was the last killer that Graham caught. And the reason why Graham is so good at his job, he's kind of messed up too. They explore this a little bit. They explore this a lot in the book, and in the film adaptation of Red Dragon, the other one, they talk about this a little bit, but Manhunter really dives into the fact that he kind of has a sick mind as well, that if he's pushed hard enough, he could be just as bad as any of the killers he's trying to catch. Like, there's even a scene where he's, like, profiling how he killed a victim, and he's almost getting excited about it. Like, when he's figuring it, like, not just because he's figuring it out, you can tell he kind of enjoys it. And there's a really good talk he has with his son, saying, you know, there was a time where I did go into a mental asylum, and I have had some dark thoughts. I confronted them, and I try to avoid them at all costs, and try to use what I have for good. And that makes him a very interesting character. But when he's talking to Lecter, Lecter knows the inners, like, his mind. Mm-hmm. And he knows he can use that against him. And there are two scenes that are identical in both Manhunter and Red Dragon that, and it's also from the book. And it's a scene where Hannibal Lecter is basically telling him, you know, we're not so different. You know, we're actually very similar. It's this scene that's been parodied in a bunch of movies like Austin Powers and stuff, like, we're not so different, you and I. But in this case, it was actually kind of true. In the Red Dragon version, Norton's character version of Graham, he just doesn't want to take it. He's like, goodbye, Dr. Lecter, and he just walks out of the room. For this version of Graham, he actually starts to get scared and actually tries to get out of the room, like the door's locked, and he's like starting to kind of hyperventilate and freak out a little bit because he's like, he knows he's right, and he just doesn't want to acknowledge it. And I love Red Dragon, but something about this movie, it feels more cold and dark, and I just really, really like it as a result.
You know, that's the whole movie. I was thinking of a comparison, you know, for all those comic book nerds of the whole Batman and Joker relationship where, yeah, Batman's trying to help people, but at the same time, you know, Batman is still messed up also, where, like, look, he's that one edge of being also in the asylum with all these freaks and everything. So at this whole movie, it was, like, I love stories of, like, the whole, hey, like, the person and the protagonist is also kind of messed up, and you kind of see where, I'm not saying where the antagonist, you know, the enemy's coming from, but the protagonist kind of sees, like, yeah, I know where you're coming from, but I'm not you, that kind of sense. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good comparison of Batman and the Joker is very similar to Graham and Lecter. In many ways, they do have a lot in common, but in the end, they're still on the opposite sides of the spectrum, but they're actually more related than they are different in some ways. But the funny thing is, about this movie as well as Silence of the Lambs, Lecter's not the main villain. Hell, he's a side character. He's not in the movie that much. In Silence of the Lambs, it's both in the book and the movie adaptation, it's Buffalo Bill. In this version, Manhunter, as well as the book Red Dragon and the movie Red Dragon, it's a killer called the Tooth Fairy. And one cool thing about the Tooth Fairy is they kind of go in the idea of a sociopath is incapable of love. Well, in this movie, he actually does kind of fall in love with a woman, with a blind woman played by Joan Allen. I forgot her name is skipping me. I know the actor, Joan Allen. They're actually one of my favorite actors. And you really start to see a bit of the duality, but in the end, his mind is too far gone, and he does sadly see her as one of his victims. But yeah, the final confrontation between him and Graham, it is absolutely amazing. And it's hilarious in this series. Everyone knows Hannibal Lecter, but nobody seems to talk about the Tooth Fairy or Buffalo Bill, and I do think that is a disservice because the Hannibal series has so many great villains in it. Even though Hannibal is definitely the most memorable, I do think that they should still pay more attention to the ones that actually got the spotlight. Because remember, Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs, those were the first 2 books. Hannibal didn't get the spotlight until the 3rd book, Hannibal, as well as the prequel book that came later, Hannibal Rising. But the first 2, he was always just a side character. So it's very interesting that he's the one that is still the most memorable, despite just being the guy that FBI agents go to visit in prison to get information on serial killers. So I always thought it was just very interesting that he had that much staying power despite having such a small role in these movies and books.
I mean, I feel like, going back to comic books, it's like that Batman comparison, where Batman has his rogue of villains and everything. But it's always the thing where people always want to go to the Joker or the Penguin. They never want to go to other side characters like, let's say, the Mad Hatter or any other, like...
Calendar Man.
Not Calendar Man. Ugh.
He actually had some really good stories. He was a messed up serial killer. He really was. And he had some of Batman's darkest stories were about him.
Really? Calendar Man?
Yeah. Yeah, he did a bunch of holiday-related murders. You didn't know about that?
No, I just thought he was a joke villain, like the Condiment King.
Oh, you're thinking about the 60s version. No, he got demented in later adaptations. Like, he was a holiday-themed serial killer.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So, that look, but that is a very good comparison. Batman has a wide rogues gallery, but people always talk about Joker and Two-Face and Penguin, despite the fact there are many others, whereas in this series, everyone talks about Hannibal. They don't talk about Tooth Fairy and Buffalo Bill that often. They talk about Buffalo Bill, but Tooth Fairy, there have been 2 adaptations of this book, and people still forget about Tooth Fairy. And I love the Red Dragon version of Tooth Fairy with Ray Fiennes playing as him. He was great too, but something about this one, the Red Dragon version tried to be more sympathizing. This one, he had some human moments, but he was still the villain. He was clearly still a monster. And this movie, I feel like only Michael Mann can make this version. Red Dragon is very similar to Silence of the Lambs and other crime and horror films of this time. Nothing is like Manhunter, and I really think Michael Mann is the only one who could have done this. Part of me does kind of feel bad that we're not talking about some of Michael Mann's bigger films like Heat or Public Enemy, but those are considered some of his best films. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad we're talking about movies that people don't really talk about. Manhunter is the forgotten Hannibal Lecter movie, and the movie that we're going to be talking about with you in a second, that's one of his first films, and no one even really knows about it, despite it actually having some great actors and being very unique from his other films. Mm-hmm. But, overall, did you have a good time watching Manhunter?
I mean, look, I definitely felt the suspense and everything. And going back to, how there were moments where he, had, conflicting feelings about, am I going to kill this blind woman? But I kind of like it when you give villains more... I guess not sympathy, but you see a more human edge to them because it makes it feel more real. Because at the same time, even the greatest villains and monsters even have someone who they kind of love in a sense, or some version of love. Because at the end of the day, I think people sometimes confuse what love is sometimes, where you can have toxic love, you can have very sick love to where it's very obsessive and lustful, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's one of the reasons why... there are different arguments of the idea of the villain. Should you be able to sympathize with them? Should you be able to just completely hate them? Do you want to know more about them, or is it scary to have the mystery? That's why the movie and the book Hannibal Rising was so polarizing, because it went into Hannibal as a young man, what led to him becoming the cannibalistic serial killer. It was actually hit out of revenge because his family his parents and his little sister, they were killed by Nazis near the end of World War II, and he fled to Paris and used his intelligence to become a doctor, and he used those skills to track down the Nazis that were responsible for his family's death, and his bloodlust resulted in him committing cannibalism and thus developing a taste for it and thus becoming the serial killer we know today. And some people really liked that. Others absolutely hated it. So it's up to you on, do you want to be more identified with the killer, or do you want to kind of have more mystery? What's scarier?
As for me, I like to stay away from that because real life is more dangerous than, the supernatural. Speaking of kind of the supernatural, let's take a break and then we'll talk about The Keep.
When you look at the number of disasters in the U.S., chances are every area will deal with some kind of emergency in the next decade. And between school, sports, and social lives, chances are you won't be with your kids when it happens. Will they know what to do? Ready.gov/kids has the educational tools and information to make the conversation easy. When the time comes, chances are they'll feel prepared, not scared. So talk with your family today.
And welcome back. So this is the first Michael Mann movie that I've ever seen. Don't kill me.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah. So right now we're going to be talking about The Keep. Let's take a quick look at the trailer.
What hit this place?
Who knows for sure?
This place was not built to keep anything out. This place was built to keep something in.
You must not stay here.
Something has been released. Something.
Did you find what you were looking for? Did you expect to find me?
What are you? Whatever kills us gets in anyway. Nothing we do, no security works.
What's happening to me?
The Keep. Presented in September. The Keep. Coming soon from Paramount Pictures.
So the third thing I will say is that, when I first started this movie, this is my first Michael Mann movie. I didn't know what to expect. The thing is, when I first saw the poster, I thought, so this is going to be like a creature of the deep, like something coming out of the Black Lagoon, like, I don't know, it's The Thing or some sort of swamp monster is going to appear. But no, it's just this big, bulky, buff monster that lives in the basement pretty much.
Yeah, it's a demon that was locked in a castle on the side of a mountain for years. Actually, it's ironic that you picked this movie because, like Manhunter, this is based on a 1981 novel. Huh. Both the novels, our films are based. Both our movies are based on novels that were released in 1981. How ironic. Yeah, and those are the only, as far as I know, those are the only book adaptations that Michael Mann has done. Are the movies that we happen to pick.
Yeah. And the thing is, when I first started watching this movie, I was like, wait, so this takes place in like 19.
It takes place during during the Nazi regime. Mm-hmm. I believe it's 1941.
Yeah, and so out of the bat, I was like, am I really gonna be rooting for these people? I mean,
no.
I'm about to say, I mean, that's the thing when it comes to like horror and special movies is that I really have to like the main characters, and like the only people I feel for is the town people, and I don't feel good for you guys, so I guess I can't wait for the monster to come and get you, coming through the walls like what was that, the Kool-Aid Man?
Like the main protagonists of the movie, they weren't actually Nazis, so it's at least if I remember correctly, this movie was a little confusing. I'm not gonna deny.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, they first come into the town, and it feels like, okay, are they gonna take over? Are they there to steal? Because at one moment they're trying to steal the silver, at first in the beginning, so it's kind of confusing a little bit.
Well, this is also one of Michael Mann's less favored movies. This is actually considered his worst.
Well, I guess I lucked out then.
In all fairness, it has garnered a cult following, but when it came out, it was panned by critics. It's like Manhunter was also panned by critics initially, but critics re-reviewed the movie years later and realized, okay, it actually is a good movie. That happens sometimes. This one, critics can still say he was finding his identity. This is Michael Mann's second film. His first one being Thief. This was when he was still trying to, I think, figure out who he was as a filmmaker, as a writer and a director. I think he was still trying to find his identity. And you could definitely see that. He's still experimenting. He's still trying. One thing I really liked about the movie, it actually had some great young actors who would go on to have amazing careers, that being Gabriel Byrne and Ian McKellen. It was a huge surprise, especially seeing Ian McKellen in this. But one of the coolest things about this, I swear the monster, the demon Malasar, I swear he's based on Darkseid from DC Comics. Like, he both acts like a supervillain from a comic book, but he looks exactly like Darkseid, especially with the piercing red eyes. I was waiting for him to do his negative vision like he did in the DC Comics throughout the whole movie.
Speaking of DC, when it comes to piercing red eyes, I just immediately thought of Mr. Freeze.
That's not a bad comparison either, to be fair.
Yeah. Just going back to filmmaking, the thing is, when I first started watching the movie, the thing that kind of made me laugh a little bit was that, okay, they go from, the truck to the town people, but they kept doing this thing where they kept going to his eye and everything. And it's like, you're not showing a different reaction. We get it. He's looking around. You can't keep going from, like, eye shot, village, then eye shot again, then a truck, then eye shot again. I'm like, I get it.
From what I learned, this movie had a difficult production, so either you could write that off as Michael Mann being experimental, or you could say they just didn't have enough shots while editing, and they had to figure something out.
It's like, oh, we need 5 more minutes, another eye shot.
Like that I've seen directors have to resort to doing that, like reusing shots. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, in order to pan out time, or because some footage was unusable. Like the film might have been damaged or something like that. But with this film, I like that it is very different from his other films. Like I said, he mostly goes into crime thrillers, and Manhunter definitely falls in that category. This is his only dark fantasy, as far as I know, that he's ever done. And as far as dark fantasies go, especially for the time and probably the budget they had, I actually kind of liked it. This seems like, I actually never saw this movie before you suggested it, but it seems like a kind of movie I would have recommended. Ironically, I feel like we switched places on this one. Because
you call yourself a Michael Mann fan.
I know more of his bigger stuff. Like, I didn't actually know about this one. Like, I know about Heat and Public Enemy and Manhunter, but with this one, I was like, wow, this does not. At first, when I started watching it and heard the plot synopsis, I was like, this does not seem like a Michael Mann movie. But as I was watching it, seeing all the experimental camera angles and the weird shifts and stuff, I was like, okay, this is a Michael Mann movie, just a very different Michael Mann movie.
Yeah, one thing I really, at the beginning, that I really was like, wow, this is kind of cool, was when, they were going through, like, the hole and everything. But then this guy just is in a black void, and the cameras are panning out. At first I thought, I was like, okay, is he just going to end up in some cavern? But it looks like he just ended up in the abyss somewhere.
Yeah, I actually remember that. I was actually going to talk about that scene. That's a great scene that shows, like, his potential as a director, because that shot really projected there's something in there with him that's larger than life. I was a little disappointed to find out what it was. It was just a bodybuilder with red eyes. I was expecting something like Cthulhu to be in there. Because I went in this completely blind. I read the plot synopsis. I knew there was a monster. I didn't know what the monster looked like. And based on that particular scene, as it's zooming out, I'm like, oh my God, this thing has to be the size of a building or more. So I was expecting something like Lovecraftian, like Cthulhu or something. No, it was just a bodybuilder, like 7 to 8 feet tall with red eyes.
Yeah, and the thing is, the villagers at the beginning, especially, like, as the guy, like, guarding the temple and everything with his sons, was like, don't touch the silver and all that kind of stuff. Don't touch the crosses. And I was like, okay, then what's down there? You don't want to know. I'm like, that's not helpful at all.
Yeah, well, actually, I really like the mystery aspect of it, and like that chasm scene really did capitalize on that. I think in the best way it could. If I just wish the monster design was a little cooler.
Yeah, like the thing is like, do you feel like this is one of those movies that could have worked more if they didn't reveal the monster at all and just kept it a mystery and kept it very vague?
I feel like if they
and
saved
just kept
it
him more in shadow.
I feel like if they saved it till the very end, that would have worked better. There have been some movies that tried that. I think they did show this one a little too early, what he looked like. And
do you think this is worse or better than what they did with, It Chapter 2, the original miniseries, where at first it was like, okay, you're chasing this clown, but then at the beginning it was just a giant spider. Do you think that's worse?
No, because with the giant spider, they saved that to the very, very end. With this one, he came in I think they're in the second act of the movie, where they reveal what he looked like. But also, I don't know what he looked like in the book. I don't know if this is accurate because Hollywood has changed monster designs from horror books all the time. Like a great example would be Rawhead Rex, it was written by a story from Clive Barker. The story, in the short story, the monster design was completely different than what it looked like in the film adaptation, which disappointed Clive Barker immensely. I don't know if the same thing happened here, where they changed the design to be more budget friendly or more consumer friendly or what. But I was just expecting a much cooler, more unique design, but it's just a bodybuilder with red eyes, essentially. I mean, if this was a comic movie, cool, but just based on the build-up, I was expecting something so much cooler.
Something otherworldly. I think that's the thing, is that when you take something that you're hyping up as a monster, but then it's humanoid. Even quote-unquote humanoid monsters, like the Swamp Thing or other monsters, at least they have a shape to them. This dude just looks like a regular dude, just with red eyes.
Yeah, I think the best example I can think of, and again, you could just boil it down to the budget and the time and the resources they had back then, but a more recent film called The Ritual that's on Netflix, they were building up what the monster in that looked like. They didn't show it until the very last 10 minutes, and it was a very unique design. It was not what I expected. It was like the body of a deer, but it had a head with no face, but the antlers was the top half of a human torso, and the mouth the bottom was also another top half of a human torso, stacked up against each other. Something that I'm where do you come up with that? I was expecting something like that in this movie. But sadly, no. Oh well.
Oh well. Too bad. So sad.
Still, I enjoyed it. I do recommend it, and I'm glad that you recommended it today.
Yeah, as I pull it out of the hat.
By the way, it's almost Thanksgiving, and I have to ask, what Thanksgiving foods are you excited for?
To be honest with you, the most Thanksgiving food I'm excited for is, of course, my mama's macaroni and cheese. And I'm one of those people who, I don't like turkey that much. Maybe it's how I've had it before, but I prefer ham, because the thing about ham is that I feel like it melts in your mouth more.
I guess it depends on how you make it. I always liked turkey, but I'll admit it wasn't my favorite. But the thing I'm looking forward to most Thanksgiving is my dad's cranberry relish. He makes the best cranberry relish in Tennessee, I think. Every time I have a friend try it, like I said, hey, I got some leftover cranberry relish. You want some? They always are shocked by how much they like it. And it's what I'm most excited for. He only makes it once a year, so.
And of course, for dessert, I'm excited for my mom's sweet potato pie, but that's just me.
That sounds nice. Well, thank you guys for joining us for what is the final episode of The Verdict this semester.
Aww.
Thanks for watching. Happy holidays.